Bikini Bottom had a way of hiding its darkest places in plain sight. Among the neon lights of the bustling city center, wedged between a run-down alley and the jagged drop into the abyssal plain, sat the most infamous restaurant in town, the Chum Bucket. It was a squat, dome-shaped structure, its paint forever dulled by the salty wind and ocean grime. The steel seemed to groan even when there was no breeze, as if it carried the weight of decades of disappointment. For most citizens, it was just a joke, the failed rival to the Krusty Krab, run by the eccentric and perpetually scheming Sheldon J. Plankton. Everyone knew the same two facts about it. The food was inedible, and the place was always empty. But no one stopped to ask the real question: why was it empty? The truth wasn't just about bad recipes. The truth ran deeper. SpongeBob had passed it countless times on his way to work. Usually, he'd smile, wave, and call out a cheerful, "Good morning, Plankton," without stopping. But this morning felt different. The fog was thick, the water unusually still. The Chum Bucket sign flickered erratically, casting long shadows that bent in strange ways. For a moment, SpongeBob thought he saw movement inside. Plankton R, not the tiny shape of Plankton or the metallic glint of Karen's screen, but something else, something taller. Inside, the Chum Bucket was dimly lit, as if the fluorescent lights overhead were struggling to stay alive. The air was heavy with the faint chemical tang of industrial cleaners, undercut by something older, a sour metallic scent that clung to the walls. No bubbling of fryers, no sizzling of grills. Just silence, except for the occasional hum of Karen's monitor and the low gurgle of some unseen pump in the back. What SpongeBob didn't know was that the Chum Bucket was more than just a failed restaurant. It was Plankton's laboratory, archive, and fortress. The visible part, the gloomy dining area, the counter with its dusty cash register, was just the tip of an iceberg. The real Chum Bucket stretched deep below the ocean floor, a maze of tunnels and rooms that few had ever seen, and those who had didn't talk about it. Plankton had always claimed these underground levels were for business purposes, but even Karen occasionally hinted otherwise. "Don't ask what's in storage room C," she once told him, her screen flickering a little too much to be just a glitch. The Chum Bucket's history was stranger than its appearance. It hadn't been built from scratch, at least not in the way most thought. Decades before Plankton had slapped his name on the sign, the building's location was home to an experimental naval research station. Its purpose? Officially, it was about marine food preservation. Unofficially, it was about biochemical compounds, the kind that could preserve food for centuries, or alter living tissue entirely. When funding dried up, the station was shut down, but much of the equipment, the wiring, the reinforced substructure, remained buried. Plankton didn't build over it by accident. He chose it. Karen knew this. She'd been there since the early days, watching him adapt the lab to his purposes. Most of their secret recipes weren't failures because they tasted bad. They were failures because they were unstable. Ingredients didn't just spoil, they changed. Sometimes the chum turned odd colors overnight. Sometimes it made strange noises from inside the freezer. And once, it began moving. Late at night, when the streets of Bikini Bottom were quiet, faint thuds and metallic scraping sounds could be heard from under the Chum Bucket's dome. Passers-by dismissed them as plumbing issues, but there were rumors, stories told by delivery fish who swore they dropped off barrels of supplies only for them to disappear without being unloaded. One claimed he heard voices from the basement, low and murmuring, speaking in a language he didn't understand. Plankton never confirmed any of it, of course, but his eyes would sometimes dart toward the floor when certain topics came up, as if checking to make sure something was still down there. One of the strangest parts of the Chum Bucket was the back corridor, a narrow hallway behind the kitchen, leading to a locked door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." SpongeBob had never been inside, but Squidward claimed he'd once peeked in during a lunch break. He described shelves lined with jars, not of food, but of strange specimens suspended in thick green liquid. Some looked like miniature sea creatures, others like pieces of something larger. Then there was the smell. Even from the dining room, a faint odor would drift out from that hallway, not rotten, exactly, but wrong, like seawater that had been trapped in a metal tank for far too long. Plankton had never allowed customers, or even repair crews, past that door. Once, when a plumbing issue threatened to flood part of the Chum Bucket, the maintenance team was told to leave the back section alone and work only near the entrance. One of them swore they saw shadows moving under the crack of the door, even though no one was inside. What made it worse was the sound that accompanied it, a low, rhythmic tapping, almost like a heartbeat, but far too slow. Despite everything, the Chum Bucket remained open day after day. Plankton's official excuse was that he couldn't let the Krusty Krab win, but there was a deeper reason. Closing the Chum Bucket would mean sealing off access to whatever was below it, and Plankton couldn't allow that. Whether it was a secret weapon, a dangerous experiment, or something he couldn't control anymore, the basement was the heart of the Chum Bucket's mystery. And lately, it had been getting louder. SpongeBob didn't know any of this yet. To him, the Chum Bucket was just where his tiny rival hung out, scheming and failing. But that was about to change. Because for the first time since he'd known him, Plankton was going to invite SpongeBob inside and pass the counter. The morning began like any other, with SpongeBob bounding down the road to the Krusty Krab. He was halfway through humming his Fry Cook anthem when a sharp voice stopped him. "Hey, SpongeBrain." Plankton was standing outside the Chum Bucket, unusually animated. His single eye darted around, scanning the street as if expecting eavesdroppers. "Oh, hi Plankton. What brings you topside this early?" SpongeBob asked, grinning. "I need assistance," Plankton said, lowering his voice. "Serious assistance. And you're the only fry cook in town who can handle it." SpongeBob blinked. "You need me? Inside the Chum Bucket?" Yes, don't make a scene," Plankton snapped. "Karen's been glitching, the refrigeration system is acting up, and He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I can't fix it alone." SpongeBob tilted his head. "I thought you didn't like help from your competition." "This isn't about competition," Plankton said. "It's about safety." That word did something strange to SpongeBob. "Safety? In the Chum Bucket?" He nodded. "Okay, Plankton, lead the way." The door groaned open, and SpongeBob stepped inside. The air felt cooler than usual, not the kind of cool from a fridge, but a damp, sunken chill that clung to the skin. The main dining area was as empty as always, but something was different. The humming of machinery was louder, and the flickering lights cast restless shadows on the walls. Plankton zipped past him toward the counter. "Follow me, and don't touch anything, unless I tell you to." Behind the counter, SpongeBob expected to see the small kitchen setup he'd glimpsed before. Instead, Plankton pressed a concealed button beneath the register. With a mechanical shutter, a section of the floor slid aside, revealing a narrow opening with a steel staircase spiraling down. A faint hiss of air rose from the darkness below. SpongeBob's eyes went wide. "I didn't know you had a basement, Plankton." "That's because I didn't want you to know," Plankton said flatly. "Until now." The steel stairs creaked as SpongeBob followed. The walls were bare metal, beaded with condensation. The deeper they went, the more the air changed, thicker, tinged with something sharp and chemical. He thought he caught hints of burnt kelp and something far less identifiable. Dim overhead lights flickered in sequence, revealing glimpses of heavy pipes snaking along the walls. Some dripped slow streams of brackish water into grates on the floor. Others were warm to the touch as SpongeBob brushed past them. They descended for what felt like several stories before stepping into a wide corridor. It wasn't like the cheerful, if dusty, dining room above. Down here, the metal was darker, older. The floor was made of thick grates, allowing glimpses of black water flowing sluggishly far below. "Welcome to the real Chum Bucket," Plankton said with a smirk, though his tone carried more weariness than pride. SpongeBob turned his head, eyes darting across the corridor. Thick steel doors lined the walls, each marked with stenciled labels. Lab 1, Storage B, Biocontainment, Freezer X. A low hum echoed from somewhere far ahead, occasionally punctuated by a sound like distant clanging. "What's that noise?" SpongeBob asked. Plankton hesitated. "Pumps, probably." They stopped in front of a door labeled Storage Room C. The stenciling was faded, as if someone had tried to scrub it away. A massive wheel lock secured it, and above the handle was a small warning sign in peeling red letters. Do not open without clearance. SpongeBob tilted his head. So, this is where you keep the secret ingredients? Plankton narrowed his eye. Something like that. But today, we're here for the refrigeration unit, which happens to be just beyond this room. And before you ask, yes, we have to go through it. He spun the wheel lock with surprising force for his size. With a hiss of pressure release, the door swung inward. The smell hit first, a cold, briny staleness mixed with something faintly metallic. The room was dim, lit only by a few flickering tubes overhead. Rows of shelves stretched into the shadows, lined with glass jars and sealed containers. The jars weren't labeled, and their contents ranged from the unsettling to the unrecognizable. Some held what looked like tangled strands of seaweed suspended in murky green fluid. Others contained pale shapes that seemed almost fleshy. SpongeBob's smile faltered. Plankton, what is all this? Research samples, Plankton said briskly, striding ahead. Nothing dangerous unless you're careless. Now keep up. But as SpongeBob followed, his eyes kept catching on strange details. A jar that seemed to have something pressing against the glass from the inside. A sealed crate that rattled softly when they passed. A container filled with fine black sand that seemed to swirl faintly, though no water stirred it. They reached the far end of the room, where another heavy door awaited. Beyond it, a small chamber hummed with machinery. Pipes led into a cylindrical unit that vibrated softly, frost forming on its edges. This is the refrigeration core, Plankton said, pointing to a control panel. Karen's monitoring system says it's overloading. If it fails, we lose containment. SpongeBob frowned. Containment of what? Of inventory, Plankton said vaguely. Here, hold that lever in position while I reset the coolant flow. SpongeBob grasped the lever. It resisted at first, then shifted with a groan. A sudden rush of cold air swept through the room. The machinery's hum grew louder, then steadied. There, Plankton said, hopping back. Crisis averted. SpongeBob smiled again. Glad I could help, but why didn't you just call a repair crew? Plankton looked away. Because outsiders don't leave this level. Before SpongeBob could process that, a sound rippled through the room. It came from the shelves back in storage room C. A muffled, rhythmic tapping. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats again. Plankton froze. What was that? SpongeBob asked. Plankton's voice was tight. We're done here. Let's go. They moved quickly back through the storage room, but SpongeBob's curiosity got the better of him. As they passed one shelf, he reached out to steady himself, and his hand brushed a jar. Inside, something shifted toward him, pressing against the glass. It was small, about the size of a clam, but its surface was slick and veined, and an unblinking black eye stared out at him. SpongeBob gasped. Plankton whipped around. Don't touch anything. They exited quickly, sealing the heavy door behind them. The tapping continued for a moment longer, then stopped. As they climbed the steel stairs back toward the daylight, SpongeBob couldn't help but feel that the cold from below had followed him, clinging to his pores, seeping into his thoughts. He'd only seen a fraction of what lay beneath the Chum Bucket, but one thing was certain. It wasn't just a bad restaurant, it was hiding something. And whatever it was awake. The day after his visit to the Chum Bucket's basement, SpongeBob couldn't focus at work. He tried to flip Krabby Patties with his usual cheer, but his hands felt stiff. Every time he looked at the sizzling grill, he saw the glass jar from storage room C, the tiny, veined shape inside, its single black eye unblinking. Squidward noticed. You're quieter than usual, Squarepants, he muttered while refilling the napkin dispensers. Did you run out of bubbles or something? No, Squidward, SpongeBob said, forcing a grin. I just saw something weird yesterday. Squidward rolled his eyes. You? Seeing something weird? Shocking. It was in the Chum Bucket, SpongeBob continued, lowering his voice. Plankton showed me this storage room, and there were jars, and in one of them... Hold it, Squidward interrupted, holding up a tentacle. You went inside the Chum Bucket? Voluntarily? And you're still alive? SpongeBob nodded. Yes, but something in there moved. And it looked at me. Squidward sighed. You're probably just imagining things. The only thing dangerous about the Chum Bucket is the food. SpongeBob tried to laugh, but the sound came out thin. He didn't tell Squidward about the tapping noises or the way Plankton had reacted, the way his voice had gone sharp and tight, the way he'd rushed SpongeBob out without explaining. By the time his shift ended, SpongeBob had made up his mind. He needed to know what that thing in the jar was. He told himself it was just curiosity, but deep down, it felt like something else. A quiet pull, a need to confirm that he hadn't imagined the way it pressed toward him in the glass. That night, the streets of Bikini Bottom were quiet. The lamplights swayed in the faint current, casting pools of dim glow onto the sand. SpongeBob approached the Chum Bucket cautiously, half expecting to see Plankton waiting for him. But the place was dark, its neon sign flickering faintly. He pushed at the door, expecting it to be locked. To his surprise, it opened with a soft creak. Inside, the air was colder than it had been that morning. And still, no hum from the machines, no flicker from Karen's monitor. The silence felt heavy. SpongeBob slipped behind the counter, finding the hidden button beneath the register. The floor panel slid back with its usual mechanical groan, revealing the steel staircase. He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder, then began his descent. The lower corridor was dimmer than before, several of the overhead lights completely dead. The hum of the machinery was fainter too, as though something had been powered down. The sound of his own steps on the metal grate floor seemed too loud in the emptiness. He reached the door to storage room C. It looked the same, the faded stenciling, the wheel lock, the peeling warning sign. But as he placed his hands on the wheel to turn it, a faint vibration ran through the metal. It wasn't machinery. It was something alive. The wheel resisted at first, then gave way with a groan. The door swung inward, and the smell hit him, that same briny, metallic tang, stronger now. The flickering lights cast uneven shadows along the shelves. The jars were still there. Some sat quietly in their greenish liquid. Others seemed cloudier, harder to see into. SpongeBob's eyes darted to the shelf where he'd seen the tiny, veined shape before. It wasn't there. The jar sat empty, its lid slightly askew, as if it had been opened and hastily closed again. A sound came from deeper in the room, soft, wet, and deliberate. SpongeBob froze. It was like the sound of something dragging across metal, pausing, then dragging again. "Hello?" he whispered. No answer. He stepped forward, moving between the shelves. Something shifted in the shadows, quick, low to the ground. The dragging stopped. Then came the tapping. 3 beats. A pause. 3 beats again. But this time, it was closer. SpongeBob turned toward the sound just in time to see movement dart behind a crate. He crept toward it, heart pounding. As he rounded the corner, his eyes met another pair. Black, round, and glistening in the dim light. It was the thing from the jar. Out of its container, it was more unsettling. A slick, pale body, its surface pulsing faintly as though it breathed through its skin. Thin, tendril-like appendages clung to the metal shelf, and its single eye never blinked. SpongeBob's voice caught in his throat. Hi there." The creature tilted slightly, as if studying him. Then, without warning, it darted down the shelf, moving faster than seemed possible for something without legs. It disappeared behind another row of jars. SpongeBob hurried after it, but when he rounded the next aisle, it was gone. The tapping started again, this time from the far end of the room. He moved toward it, but as he did, something else caught his attention. A large, sealed tank set into the wall, partially obscured by a tarp. The tarp was heavy and damp, but SpongeBob pulled it back. The tank's glass was fogged, but inside he could see a shape, much larger than the creature he'd just seen. Its outline shifted slowly, as though it were alive. For a moment, he thought he saw several eyes glinting back at him from the misty interior. A voice echoed behind him. "What do you think you're doing?" SpongeBob spun around. Plankton stood in the doorway, his single eye narrowed in fury. I just wanted to," SpongeBob stammered. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Plankton snapped, his voice low but trembling. "You opened the room without me. You could have let something out." "I saw it," SpongeBob said quickly. "The little thing from the jar. It's loose." Plankton's expression shifted, not to surprise, but to something like resignation. "Then it's already too late," he muttered. Before SpongeBob could ask what he meant, the tapping started again, louder this time. And it wasn't just coming from one direction. It was echoing from multiple shelves, from the floor grates, even from the walls. Plankton's voice was sharp. "Get upstairs, now." SpongeBob hesitated, but the tapping grew into a steady rhythm, surrounding them. Something metallic rattled from one of the shelves, and a jar tipped over, shattering on the grate. A pale tendril slid out from behind it. Plankton was already at the door. "SpongeBob, move!" They bolted out, slamming the heavy wheel lock shut behind them. The tapping didn't stop. It echoed through the steel, slow and deliberate. As they hurried back toward the stairs, SpongeBob glanced over his shoulder. For just a moment, he thought he saw something dark slip through the grate in the floor, moving deeper into the facility. The metal wheel lock clanged shut behind them, sealing storage room C. SpongeBob stood on the grated floor of the lower corridor, his breath quick and shallow. The tapping on the other side of the door hadn't stopped. In fact, it had shifted. Faster now, irregular, like more than one set of whatever made that sound. Plankton didn't speak at first. He was pacing in tight, rapid lines, muttering under his breath. Occasionally, SpongeBob caught a word: protocol, ventilation, quarantine, but none of it made sense. Finally, Plankton stopped and looked up at him. "Listen to me, SpongeBob. I need you to go home. Forget what you saw. Forget you were ever here." SpongeBob's eyes widened. "Plankton, what is that thing? The one from the jar, and all the other stuff in there?" Plankton hesitated. His single eye darted toward the floor, toward the black water flowing slowly beneath the grates. "They're specimens, experiments, leftovers from before I took over this place." "Leftovers?" SpongeBob repeated. Plankton's tone dropped lower. "When I bought the Chum Bucket, I didn't just get a bad kitchen and a terrible location. I got what was buried beneath it, the old research labs. And some of the projects they left behind weren't exactly abandoned, willingly." SpongeBob's voice went quiet. "You mean, they're alive?" Plankton didn't answer directly. "They're contained, or they were, until you." He stopped himself, shaking his head. "We need to get Karen online, now." They moved quickly down the corridor toward a side door marked Systems Control. Inside, Karen's screen was dark, her casing half open with wires spilling out like seaweed. Plankton hopped onto her console, frantically plugging in connections. "Karen," he called, his voice tight. "Wake up, dear." Her screen flickered, pixelating before snapping into focus. "Plankton, why is the security feed for Storage Room C offline? And why are multiple motion sensors tripping in biocontainment?" Plankton's voice was clipped. "We have a breach. Activate lockdown." Red lights began flashing overhead. A low klaxon echoed through the underground corridors, vibrating through the metal walls. Doors slammed shut automatically with hydraulic hisses. SpongeBob's heart pounded. Plankton? What does lockdown mean exactly?" "It means," Karen said flatly, "you just became part of the problem." SpongeBob swallowed. "That doesn't sound good." The intercom crackled with Karen's synthetic voice. "Movement detected in vent shaft 4. Multiple organisms, small to medium size." Plankton cursed under his breath and leapt from the console. "We're not staying here. They know how to get in through the vents. We need to reach the upper level before." A metallic clang rang out above them, followed by a hollow scraping sound. SpongeBob looked up just in time to see the grate in the ceiling bulge inward. Something pale and slick pressed through the slats, tendrils first, then the glint of an unblinking eye. "Go!" Plankton barked. They burst into the corridor, Karen's voice following them. "They've breached Sector D, sealing auxiliary doors." As they ran, SpongeBob's gaze caught flashes of movement through the grated floor, the sponge porced, shapes sliding in the black water below, keeping pace with them. One darted ahead, disappearing into the darkness. They reached the steel staircase, but before they could start climbing, a heavy door in front of them slammed down with a deafening thud. A hydraulic lock hissed into place. Karen's voice came over the speakers. Main stairwell sealed to prevent surface contamination. SpongeBob spun to Plankton. Surface contamination? Plankton, what is happening? Plankton clenched his fists. It means they're not supposed to leave. If they get topside, well, let's just say the Krusty Krab won't have any customers left to serve. Before SpongeBob could respond, another sound cut through the corridor, the sharp, wet slap of something hitting the floor behind them. They turned. One of the creatures from the jars was there, illuminated by the flashing red lights. This one was larger than the one SpongeBob had seen before. Its pale, veined surface stretched over a swollen body. Tendrils writhed beneath it, carrying it forward with an unsettling glide. Its single black eye locked on SpongeBob. He backed away. Hi there." The creature emitted a sound, not quite a hiss, not quite a gurgle. It was low, almost curious. Then it lunged. SpongeBob yelped, leaping sideways. The creature slammed into the wall with a wet thud, its tendrils slapping at the floor. Plankton darted toward a nearby maintenance hatch and began spinning its wheel lock. In here. SpongeBob dove through the opening just as the creature skittered toward them again. Plankton slammed the hatch shut, the sound of tendrils scraping against the metal echoing on the other side. The maintenance tunnel was narrow and dim, lined with thick cables and dripping pipes. The air was warmer here, the metallic smell replaced by something faintly chemical. Plankton was already moving. This leads to the emergency lift. If it's still operational, we can reach the kitchen. They crawled through the tunnel, the distant clangs of pursuit echoing behind them. Occasionally, SpongeBob thought he heard tapping again, but now it seemed to come from multiple directions at once. After several tense minutes, they reached the lift, a small, rusted platform surrounded by wire mesh. Plankton jabbed at the controls. The lift shuddered, then began to rise. As they ascended, SpongeBob looked down through the mesh floor. Below, in the dim emergency lights, he could see them, at least half a dozen of the pale creatures, sliding along the corridor, their eyes all fixed upward. One of them lifted a tendril, pressing it to the underside of the lift as they rose out of sight. When they reached the upper kitchen, the lift doors groaned open. The normal lights here felt almost blinding after the gloom below. Plankton didn't waste time. "Karen, status." Her voice crackled through a wall speaker. "Sector D and Storage C are fully sealed. However, organisms have reached Vent Shaft 1. That's in the dining area." SpongeBob's stomach dropped. "That's up here." As if on cue, a faint metallic tapping echoed through the Chum Bucket's quiet dining room. It was coming from behind the menu board. Plankton's expression hardened. "Stay behind me." The tapping grew louder. Then, with a sudden metallic snap, the menu board's panel popped outward, and something pale and slick began to slide through. The panel of the menu board clattered to the floor, and a slick, pale form pressed through the gap. SpongeBob instinctively stepped back until he bumped into the counter. The fluorescent lights above caught the sheen of the thing's skin, stretched over a pulsing body. Its tendrils slid forward first, tasting the air, before the rest of it emerged with an almost fluid motion. Plankton's voice was sharp. "Don't move, SpongeBob." The creature's single, glossy eye swiveled toward them. It made no noise at first, only the faint, wet sound of its tendrils dragging against the tiled floor. Then came that rhythmic tapping again, but this time, SpongeBob could see it. One tendril was knocking lightly against the counter, as though testing its surroundings. Plankton darted toward the wall panel near the kitchen. His tiny hands worked furiously over the controls. "Karen, deploy surface-level suppression gas. Target coordinates, dining area." Karen's voice hummed over the speakers. "Warning, suppression gas is not rated for unprotected surface organisms." "Just do it," Plankton barked. SpongeBob's eyes widened. "Unprotected organisms? Plankton, that means me." Before Karen could respond, a hiss filled the room as vents above began releasing a faint, bluish vapor. The creature froze, its tendrils curling inward. Its eye darted toward the ceiling, then toward Plankton, before it began retreating the way it came, sliding back through the menu board gap, vanishing into the shadows of the ventilation shaft. The hiss stopped. The vapor thinned. SpongeBob coughed once, waving his hand in front of his face. "Plankton, What was that thing? Plankton didn't meet his gaze. A mistake I didn't make, but one I inherited. Now you see why this place stays open, no matter how few customers I have. SpongeBob frowned. Because you're keeping them from getting out? Plankton sighed, hopping down from the panel. You think I'd waste my life chasing Krabby Patty recipes if it weren't for them? Someone has to keep watch over what's in those lower levels. If I shut this place down, the seals, the security, the containment systems, all of it stops. And then those things have the run of the ocean. SpongeBob's eyes narrowed. But why didn't you tell anyone? Mr. Krabs, Sandy, even Mermaid Man. Because, Plankton snapped, the last time this place was in government hands, they made those things. You think turning it over again would help? Number, they just keep experimenting. At least I'm not making more of them. A metallic clang rang out from the kitchen. Both of them turned sharply. The sound came again, heavier this time, like something large dropping onto the tile. Plankton bolted to the counter and peered over. His voice dropped to a hiss. They're coming up another way. Before SpongeBob could react, a pale, glistening tendril slithered up over the counter's edge. Then another. This creature was larger than the one from the menu board, its body segmented with faint ridges under the skin. Its eye locked on Plankton instantly. Plankton backed away. Karen, seal kitchen vents, now! Metal shutters slammed down over the ventilation openings. But the creature didn't retreat. It dropped fully onto the counter, tendrils spreading wide as if anchoring itself. SpongeBob's instincts as a fry cook kicked in. He grabbed a spatula from the utensil rack and held it like a sword. Stay back, he said, though his voice wavered. The creature tilted toward him, unblinking. Then it lunged, not at Plankton, but at SpongeBob. He swung the spatula, the flat edge smacking into its surface with a dull, rubbery thud. It recoiled, letting out a low, bubbling hiss. Don't hurt it, Plankton shouted. SpongeBob blinked. What? Plankton darted toward the emergency panel on the counter. If you damage them, they release spores. You think they're bad now, wait until you're breathing them. The creature lunged again. This time SpongeBob sidestepped, letting it slam into the wall behind him. It lingered there for a moment, tendrils pressed against the surface as though listening through it. Then, abruptly, it began retreating toward the edge of the counter. Plankton hit a final switch, and a reinforced metal shutter dropped between the counter and the kitchen floor. The creature slid under it just in time to escape being pinned. For a long moment, the two of them just stood there, listening to the faint, receding scrape of tendrils on tile. SpongeBob was the first to speak. Plankton, how many of them are there? Plankton hesitated. Enough to make me lose sleep every night. Not enough to be everywhere at once. Yet. The word yet landed like a stone in SpongeBob's stomach. Karen's voice came over the intercom again. Organisms have retreated to sub-level 3. Containment integrity at 87%. Minor damage to ventilation seals. SpongeBob turned toward the staircase to the basement. We should fix it. Before they come back. Plankton raised a brow. We? You can't do this alone, SpongeBob said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. I've dealt with jellyfish stampedes, giant clams, even Alaskan bullworms. I can handle some jar creatures. Plankton stared at him for a long moment, then smirked faintly. Fine. But you follow my lead, and you don't touch anything unless I say so. They headed back toward the lift to the lower levels. As they descended, the air grew colder again, the faint hum of the machinery returning. But beneath it was another sound. 22. A slow, wet patter, as though something was dripping steadily onto the metal grates below. When they reached sub-level 3, the lights flickered weakly. Several ventilation panels hung loose from the ceiling, their edges bent inward. Plankton scanned the damage quickly. They were trying to widen the gaps. If they'd had another hour, they'd be in the ductwork all the way to downtown. SpongeBob shivered. But they didn't, right? Plankton's tone was grim. Not yet. They moved deeper into the corridor, sealing and replacing panels as they went. Several times, SpongeBob thought he saw movement in the shadows, quick, darting shapes just beyond the edge of the light. At one point, while Plankton was tightening a panel latch, SpongeBob heard that tapping again. It wasn't coming from the floor or the walls this time. It was coming from inside one of the sealed vents they hadn't reached yet. He leaned closer, squinting into the dark opening. For a brief moment, an eye blinked back at him. SpongeBob's breath fogged faintly as he stared into the dark opening of the vent. The eye that had been looking back at him was gone, replaced by the hollow blackness of the duct. Still, the faint tapping sound continued, slow, deliberate, like a metronome that had learned how to breathe. Plankton looked up from the latch he was tightening. "Why are you just standing there? That panel's not going to reattach itself." SpongeBob pointed into the vent. "There's something in there. I saw it. It was watching me." Plankton's expression tightened. He hopped closer and peered inside. "Vent shaft 4B, he muttered. "Figures. It connects to the old service ducts." "The old what?" SpongeBob asked. "Service ducts," Plankton said flatly. "Back when this place was a research station, they used these tunnels to move sensitive materials without anyone seeing. Perfect place for something to hide." SpongeBob shivered. "So, we're just going to seal it up, right?" Plankton's tone was grim. "If we seal it with them inside, they'll just chew through somewhere else. No, we need to clear it." "Clear it?" SpongeBob squeaked. "You mean go in there?" Plankton's single eye didn't blink. "Got a better idea?" SpongeBob swallowed hard. "Nope." The access hatch to the vents was just a few meters down the corridor. It opened with a rusty squeal, revealing a narrow square tunnel lined with dust, old cables, and the faint shimmer of condensation on the metal. The air inside smelled stale, with a faint tang of salt and something less pleasant, a sour, organic odor that made SpongeBob's stomach tighten. Plankton climbed onto SpongeBob's shoulder. "You're the muscle, I'm the brains. Try not to confuse our roles." They crawled in, the dim emergency lights behind them fading until they were surrounded by darkness. SpongeBob's breathing sounded too loud in the confined space. Every movement made the metal creak beneath them. After a few meters, Plankton spoke quietly. "Keep your voice down. Sound carries in here." SpongeBob nodded, though Plankton couldn't see him. He focused on the faint trail ahead. Spots where condensation had been disturbed, smeared in irregular patterns. The tapping started again. This time it was faint and ahead of them, echoing through the metal. SpongeBob froze. "Plankton," he whispered. "I hear it," Plankton said softly. "They're moving." They continued, the tunnel narrowing until SpongeBob had to crawl on his elbows. The tapping grew louder, and now there was another sound with it, a slow, wet dragging, like something pulling itself along the metal. They reached a junction where the duct split into 3 paths. Plankton pointed to the rightmost one. "That leads to the vent you were looking into earlier. If we're lucky, they're heading back that way." SpongeBob turned, but as he did, a shadow shifted in the left tunnel. It was subtle, just the faintest ripple in the darkness. Then came a noise neither of them had heard before, a short, high-pitched chitter, followed by silence. Plankton stiffened. "That's new." The shadow moved again, and this time, SpongeBob caught the glint of an eye, not one, but several, arranged in a curve. The pale surface around them pulsed faintly, and thin tendrils began probing the air. "Back up," Plankton said quickly. "Now." They retreated down the right tunnel, moving faster now. The creature didn't lunge, but it followed, its body scraping lightly against the metal. The tapping began again, matching their pace. "Plankton, it's not stopping," SpongeBob whispered. "Of course it's not stopping," Plankton hissed. "You're in its territory." The duct angled downward slightly, making the metal slick under SpongeBob's hands. The tapping grew louder, joined by a second set of taps, something else moving in sync with the first. They rounded a corner and saw it, a vent grate ahead, dim light spilling through from the maintenance bay below. Relief surged through SpongeBob. There! But before they could reach it, a pale tendril whipped around the corner behind them, wrapping around SpongeBob's ankle. It was slick, cold, and surprisingly strong. SpongeBob yelped, kicking against it. The tendril tightened, pulling him backward. Another tendril shot forward, wrapping around his other leg. Plankton scrambled up toward the grate. "Hold still!" he barked, disappearing through a small gap above the grate's frame. SpongeBob twisted onto his back, gripping the nearest tendril with both hands. Its surface writhed under his touch, pulsing like something alive inside it. He pulled, stretching it taut, then let it snap free from his grip. The creature recoiled slightly, the eye in the darkness blinking once. From the other side of the grate, Plankton's voice echoed, "Duck your head." SpongeBob dropped flat. A sudden burst of compressed steam shot through the duct, blasting past him toward the pursuing shapes. The hiss was deafening in the enclosed space, and the tendrils loosened instantly. He scrambled forward, pulling himself toward the grate. Plankton had managed to disengage the latch, and with a sharp push, it swung open. SpongeBob tumbled out into the maintenance bay below, the grate slamming shut behind him. The tapping started again almost immediately, this time from the other side of the grate. Slow, deliberate. Plankton hopped down to the floor beside him. "That's one path blocked, for now." SpongeBob sat up, breathing hard. "Plankton..." There were more than one in there. Plankton's voice was tight. "Of course there were. They don't work alone." They both turned to look at the grate. The eye was there again. No, several eyes, glinting in the dim light. They didn't blink. Plankton sighed heavily. "We've got a bigger problem than I thought. They're moving in groups now, which means they're coordinating." SpongeBob shivered. "Coordinating? For what?" Plankton didn't answer. He just looked toward the door that led deeper into the sublevels. The maintenance bay was quiet, save for the faint, deliberate tapping behind the sealed vent. SpongeBob tried not to look at the cluster of black eyes peering through the grating, but it was impossible to ignore the way they shifted in unison, following every slight movement he made. Plankton stood still, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the floor as if lost in calculation. Finally, he muttered, "If they're grouping, it means they've found something, or they've been called." SpongeBob blinked. "Called? You mean like they have a leader?" Plankton's tone was sharp. "Don't anthropomorphize them, SpongeBob. They're not people. They're a system, pieces of a larger whole." SpongeBob tilted his head. "Like a hive?" Plankton's single eye darted toward him. "Don't say that word." They moved out of the maintenance bay and into the lower corridor. The lights overhead flickered, and the hum of machinery seemed thinner here, almost drowned out by the steady pulse of water in the pipes. "Karen," Plankton called, his voice echoing. Her voice crackled over a wall speaker. "I'm here. What's left of me, anyway? Power draw from sublevel 4 is spiking. I've got systems down there that aren't even on my schematics." SpongeBob frowned. "Sublevel 4? I thought this place only had 3 levels." Plankton shot him a sharp look. "It does. Officially." Karen's tone dropped. "Plankton, you need to tell him." Plankton muttered something under his breath, then sighed. "Fine. There's an older section of this facility. Older than me. Older than the Chum Bucket. The Naval Research Station that was here before didn't just build one lab. They built down. I never bothered going too far into it because... Because? SpongeBob pressed. Plankton hesitated. Because I didn't like what I saw the first time I tried. The hallway ended at a wall of reinforced steel, clearly much older than the rest of the structure. It was covered in patches of corrosion, and the faded outline of some long-removed logo was still visible. A circle with jagged lines radiating from it, like a stylized sea urchin. SpongeBob stepped closer. "What's behind it?" "A blast door," Plankton said quietly. "And behind that, the original holding areas, the ones they sealed when the station shut down." SpongeBob ran a hand over the cold metal. "And you've never been past it?" Plankton's eye narrowed. "Once, and I didn't go far. The air was wrong. The walls were breathing." SpongeBob froze. "Breathing?" Plankton waved it off. "Metaphorically. Probably." The blast door had no handle, only an ancient locking wheel coated in grime. Plankton scuttled up onto a nearby pipe and motioned for SpongeBob. "Turn it, slowly. If the seals are intact, we'll hear the pressure release." SpongeBob gripped the wheel and strained against it. It resisted at first, then gave with a groaning screech that echoed down the corridor. A faint hiss followed, and a thin draft of air spilled out, colder than the rest of the lower levels, and carrying a faint smell of rust and something sour. The door swung open to reveal a narrow passage sloping downward. The walls here weren't the clean industrial metal of the Chum Bucket's newer sections. They were rough, irregular, coated in mineral buildup. Faint, luminescent streaks ran through the surface, like veins glowing with pale green light. SpongeBob stepped inside, and the air changed instantly. It was heavier, the pressure slightly greater, like being deeper underwater than he was used to. The faint hum of machinery was gone, replaced by a low, constant thrum, not mechanical, not exactly alive, but somewhere between. They followed the passage downward for several minutes. It twisted unpredictably, as if it had been carved around something rather than designed. Occasionally, SpongeBob caught glimpses of old, rusted pipes embedded in the walls, some broken and dripping thick, dark fluid. The passage ended in a small chamber. In the center was a circular hatch set into the floor, its edges sealed with bolts the size of dinner plates. Around it were faded markings, symbols SpongeBob didn't recognize, spirals, jagged lines, shapes like stylized fish with too many eyes. SpongeBob knelt by the hatch. "What's this?" Plankton's voice was tight. "Containment lid. Whatever's below it was too dangerous to keep in open tanks." SpongeBob ran a finger over one of the symbols. "So, the things in the jars, the ones in the vents, they came from down there?" Plankton hesitated for a long time before answering. "Not exactly. They're the ones that could survive outside it. Most of what's down there couldn't." Before SpongeBob could ask more, the thrum in the air deepened. The metal under his hands vibrated slightly, and a faint tapping sound rose from beneath the hatch. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats again. Plankton's eye went wide. That's not possible. The tapping grew louder, joined by a second, fainter pattern. Beat, 2 beats. Pause, 2 beats. They alternated, overlapping like a conversation in code. SpongeBob stood slowly. "Plankton, I think they know we're here." From the far wall, something shifted. A section of the mineral-coated surface bulged outward, fine cracks forming along it. SpongeBob stepped back instinctively as a pale tendril pushed through, searching the air like a blind worm. Plankton hissed, "We're leaving. Now." The tendril brushed the floor, curling around the edge of the hatch as if testing it. More cracks appeared in the wall. SpongeBob grabbed Plankton and turned toward the passage. The thrum in the air was faster now, more urgent. Behind them, the tendril withdrew from the hatch, not in retreat, but to make space as something larger pressed against the wall from the other side. They scrambled back up the sloping passage, the air growing warmer with each step. But the sounds behind them followed, not just tapping now, but the slow scrape of something massive dragging itself against metal and stone. When they reached the blast door, SpongeBob yanked it shut and spun the wheel lock until it screeched. The noise on the other side stopped. The only sound left was their own breathing. Plankton was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the sealed door. Then, quietly, he said, "We woke it up." The blast door stayed shut, but SpongeBob couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The silence on the other side wasn't the quiet of retreat. It was the kind of stillness that came before movement. Plankton hopped down from the wheel lock, muttering to himself, "This is bad. This is worse than bad. This is a catastrophe waiting to crawl up the stairs." SpongeBob leaned against the cold steel. "What is it, Plankton? What's under that hatch?" Plankton didn't look at him. The records called it Specimen Zero, the first thing they ever found in the trench. Everything else down here, the jar creatures, the tendril crawlers, they're all byproducts. "Fragments." "Fragments?" SpongeBob repeated, shivering. "Pieces of something whole," Plankton said grimly. "And if that whole thing wakes up, the pieces will come running." As if on cue, Karen's voice crackled over the speaker embedded in the wall. "Plankton, you need to get topside now. I've got movement on every camera. Multiple organisms in the ventilation, the maintenance corridors, even the emergency lift shaft." Plankton's eye twitched. "How many?" "Too many," Karen replied. They ran back up the sloping corridor toward the newer sublevels. The moment they reached sublevel 3, SpongeBob froze. The red emergency lights were already flashing, and the air was filled with a faint, wet patter, like rain falling on metal. But it wasn't rain. From every corner, Pale tendrils slid into the open. Some curled along the floor, others hung from the ceiling vents like strange vines. And every single one was tapping, not in unison, but in overlapping patterns, the sound echoing through the metal halls. SpongeBob's voice was barely above a whisper. They're talking to each other. Plankton grabbed his arm, which means Zero is already in control. Come on. They sprinted down the corridor toward the emergency lift. But when they turned the last corner, they skidded to a stop. The lift platform was gone, pulled down the shaft into darkness. At the edge, a single pale tendril hung limp, twitching faintly before sliding out of sight. Karen's voice was urgent. Main stairwell still sealed, but they're breaching the dining area from below. I've lost the kitchen cameras. Then we're trapped, SpongeBob said, his voice shaking. Plankton's tone turned sharp. Not yet. There's one more way to the surface, but it's not exactly safe. They cut through the maintenance tunnel from Chapter 6, moving fast. The tunnel's narrow walls rattled as something large moved through the ducts parallel to them, keeping pace. Once, SpongeBob caught a glimpse of a slick, segmented body through a cracked vent plate, bigger than any of the creatures he'd seen so far. Its surface patterned with faint, pulsating lines that reminded him disturbingly of the glowing veins in the older passage walls. The tunnel ended at a ladder that disappeared upward into the shadows. A faint draft blew down from above, carrying with it the scent of open water. Plankton pointed upward. This leads to the rooftop exhaust vent. From there, we can jump into the open street. SpongeBob blinked. Jump? Plankton smirked. Unless you want to go back the way we came. They began climbing, SpongeBob's spongy hands gripping the cold metal rungs. The faint light from above grew brighter, but halfway up, the ladder shuddered violently. A pale tendril whipped through the gap below, wrapping around one of the rungs and pulling hard. SpongeBob climbed faster. The tendril snapped free, retreating, but the tapping began again, this time vibrating through the ladder itself. They burst out onto the Chum Bucket's rooftop. The neon sign flickered overhead, its buzzing loud in the sudden stillness. For a moment, SpongeBob thought they'd made it. Then he saw the street. The sand outside the Chum Bucket was shifting. Small, pale shapes moved just beneath the surface, their outlines faint but unmistakable. Every few seconds, one would break the surface briefly. A glint of an eye, the flash of a tendril, before disappearing again. Plankton hopped onto the rooftop ledge, scanning the street. They're surrounding the building, Zero's calling them in. SpongeBob's voice trembled. So, what do we do? Before Plankton could answer, the roof beneath them creaked. A circular vent cover began to bulge upward, the screws straining against the pressure. Something was pushing from below. The cover popped free with a clang, and a massive, pale form rose from the opening. This one was different. Its tendrils were thicker, lined with fine, hair-like filaments that writhed independently. The single eye in its center was larger, darker, and more fixed than the others. Plankton stepped back. That's one of the first-generation crawlers. I thought they were extinct. The crawler lunged, tendrils whipping toward them. SpongeBob dove aside, the tip of a tendril grazing his arm and leaving behind a faint, tingling sensation. The thing's eye swiveled toward him, unblinking. Plankton! SpongeBob shouted. Ideas! Plankton's gaze darted toward the glowing Chum Bucket sign. Electricity. Get it to touch the sign's frame. SpongeBob grabbed the end of one of the tendrils as it lashed toward him, twisting his body to pull it in the right direction. The crawler resisted, its filaments tightening around his grip. With a final heave, SpongeBob swung it into the metal base of the sign. The neon buzzed, then flared brightly. A sharp crack filled the air, and the crawler convulsed, its tendrils thrashing wildly before it withdrew back into the vent with surprising speed. The street below went still. The shapes beneath the sand seemed to pause, as if listening. Karen's voice cut through the rooftop speaker. Surface breach delayed, but movement is still inbound from sub-level 4. Plankton, you have minutes, maybe less. Plankton turned to SpongeBob. We can't hold them here. If we're going to stop this, we have to go back down, all the way to Zero. SpongeBob blinked. You mean into the place you said you'd never go again? Yes, Plankton said grimly. Because if Zero's awake, the only way to put it back to sleep is face it directly. SpongeBob looked toward the street, where the faint movements had resumed, circling the building, then back to the rooftop vent where the crawler had disappeared. His voice was steady when he answered, "Then let's go." The hatch to sub-level 4 waited at the end of the older corridor, the steel blast door still sealed. But now, as SpongeBob and Plankton approached, the metal trembled faintly under their feet. The thrum they'd heard earlier was louder, faster, like the slow heartbeat of something vast. Plankton climbed onto the locking wheel. "Once this is open, we're not stopping. No detours, no heroics, straight to the core chamber." SpongeBob's voice was steady, but his stomach nodded. "And what happens when we get there?" "We hope," Plankton said grimly, "that it's still chained." The wheel screeched as they turned it. A hiss of pressure release rolled out, colder than before. The air had changed, thicker, saturated with a sour metallic scent that clung to the back of the throat. They stepped into the sloping passage, their footsteps echoing against the rough mineral-coated walls. The pale green veins running through the rock seemed brighter now, pulsing in time with the distant thrum. They moved quickly, the corridor twisting unpredictably, until it opened into a space unlike anything SpongeBob had seen before. The core chamber was massive, a cavern that looked almost natural, yet ringed with rusting catwalks and abandoned equipment. In the center was the containment hatch from earlier, but here, up close, it was clear it wasn't just a hatch. It was a giant, circular seal, layered with interlocking plates and wrapped in heavy chains bolted directly into the floor. The markings around it were clearer here. They weren't random, they were warnings. Jagged fish shapes with rows of eyes, spiral patterns broken by sharp slashes, symbols that made SpongeBob's vision swim if he stared too long. Plankton's voice was low. "The first time I came here, I turned back at this point. I didn't like the way it noticed me." SpongeBob shivered. "Noticed you?" Before Plankton could answer, the thrum deepened. A crack, impossibly thin, appeared in the seam of the central plate. From it, a thread of black liquid seeped upward, vanishing into the metal like it had been absorbed. SpongeBob stepped back. "Plankton, is it supposed to do that?" "No," Plankton said flatly. The symbols around the hatch began to glow faintly, the spirals shifting almost imperceptibly, like the lines were writhing. The air thickened until every breath felt weighted. Karen's voice crackled faintly through Plankton's earpiece. "I've lost all sensors down there. You're on your own." A sound rose from beneath the hatch, not tapping this time, but a low, resonant hum, layered with undertones that felt less like sound and more like vibration through the bones. SpongeBob's head swam, and for a moment, he thought he heard words in it, not in any language he knew, but in a rhythm that felt deliberate. Plankton grabbed his arm. "Don't listen. That's how it pulls you closer." As if in response, the crack in the hatch widened. A tendril emerged, thicker than the crawlers, its surface not pale but mottled with dark, shifting patterns. It didn't lash out. Instead, it lay across the floor, the tip curling toward them in a slow, almost inviting gesture. SpongeBob's voice was barely a whisper. "It knows we're here." "Of course it knows," Plankton said, backing away. "It's been waiting." Another tendril emerged, followed by a faint chittering sound from the walls of the cavern. SpongeBob turned, and his breath caught. The smaller creatures were here too. Crawlers, vent dwellers, jar things, all clustering along the walls, their eyes reflecting the pale green glow. They weren't attacking, they were watching. Plankton's tone sharpened. "This is it. This is Zero's hive mind. It doesn't just control them, it is them." The tendrils shifted, curling toward the gathered creatures. In perfect unison, the smaller beings began tapping, 3 beats. Pause, 3 beats, echoing the code SpongeBob had heard so many times before. The chamber seemed to vibrate with it, the pulse syncing with the glow in the walls. Plankton pulled a small cylindrical device from a compartment on his belt. Electromagnetic disruptor. In theory, it should scramble the signal between Zero and its pieces. In practice, well, let's hope theory works. He darted toward the hatch, the device clutched in both hands. SpongeBob moved to follow, but the tendril curled higher, blocking the path. The surface rippled, and for a moment, SpongeBob swore he saw faint impressions forming, outlines of eyes, mouths, shapes that didn't quite make sense. The hum deepened again, and SpongeBob felt a tug in his mind. Not physical, but persuasive. A thought that wasn't his own whispered, "Open it." He shook his head violently. Nope, not happening. Plankton reached the base of the hatch and slammed the disruptor onto one of the central chains. The device sparked, emitting a sharp, oscillating whine. The smaller creatures reacted instantly. Their tapping faltered, several retreating into the shadows. The tendril in front of SpongeBob recoiled, twitching. The crack in the hatch began to close, slowly, as if resisting. The green glow in the walls dimmed slightly. Then, without warning, another tendril burst from the seam on the opposite side, sweeping across the floor. It struck the disruptor, sending it skittering across the chamber. Sparks flared, and the oscillating whine cut out. The tapping resumed, louder, faster, now joined by the chittering of dozens of unseen mouths. Plankton staggered back, eyes wide. It adapted. It learned. The tendrils began to rise higher, curling and uncoiling in the dim light. The smaller creatures moved closer to the center, forming a loose circle around the hatch. SpongeBob grabbed Plankton, pulling him toward the exit. "We can't stop it like this. We need another plan." Plankton didn't resist, but his gaze stayed locked on the hatch. If it gets through that seal, there won't be anywhere to run. They backed toward the sloping corridor. The glow from the veins in the walls brightened again, the thrum growing deeper and faster. In the last moment before they turned the corner, SpongeBob looked back and saw the crack in the hatch split just a little wider, enough for something inside to press against it. Whatever it was huge. The sloping passage to sub-level 4 groaned under their steps, as if the metal itself knew where they were headed. The deeper they went, the stronger the thrum became, not a sound anymore, but a pulse that pressed against SpongeBob's chest from the inside. The blast door loomed ahead, cold condensation beating on its surface. Plankton hopped onto the locking wheel, his voice taut. "This is it, SpongeBob. We shut it down here, or it breaks out everywhere." SpongeBob gripped the wheel. "How?" "Protocol Brinefall," Plankton said. "The old station's last-ditch failsafe. They built cryobrine tanks in Freezer X, ultra-cold, ultra-saline. If it floods the chamber, Zero's bioelectric signal short-circuits. It goes back to sleep." SpongeBob nodded. "So, we just open a valve?" Plankton's single eye hardened. 3 valves, systems control, Freezer X, and the final diverter here in the chamber. And one of them has to be held in place until the lock reseals. "Guess who's doing the holding?" SpongeBob said with a faint smile. The blast door wheel shrieked as they turned it. A hiss of pressure release, and the stale air of sub-level 4 spilled into the corridor, heavier, sourer, and vibrating faintly in rhythm with the veins of pale green light in the walls. They moved fast. First stop, systems control. Karen's screen flickered weakly, static cutting through her voice. "You're actually doing it, huh? Brinefall's never been tested." "First time for everything," Plankton snapped, scrambling into her control panel. He rerouted the ancient plumbing systems, gauges twitching into life after decades of silence. "Primary gate set. Pump pressure at 50%. "Make it 100, SpongeBob said. "You planning to keep your arms after this?" Plankton muttered, adjusting the flow. Something scraped the ceiling. SpongeBob looked up to see a vent grill flex inward. Without thinking, he grabbed a mop bucket of soapy water from the corner, took a deep breath, and blew a shimmering bubble sheet across the opening. The grill burst outward and slapped against the membrane. Pale tendrils pressed against it, but the bubble held, quivering. "Nice improvisation," Plankton said without looking up. "Now let's move before they find another route." They sprinted to Freezer X, the air dropping sharply in temperature until each breath felt like a sip of ice water. Frost glittered on the floor pipes. Through a viewing window, SpongeBob glimpsed massive steel tanks filled with pitch-black liquid. Each bore a stenciled warning: extreme cold, salinity hazard. Plankton hopped onto the valve panel. "When I say now, you crank that wheel until your arms scream. Got it?" SpongeBob braced himself. "Got it. Now." The wheel resisted, stubborn from years of disuse. SpongeBob leaned in, his square shoulders straining. It inched, then groaned, then finally spun free. Deep within the pipes, a roar began, the sound of liquid rushing into channels long forgotten. Flow established, Karen confirmed over the intercom. Brine levels rising, temperature falling. They turned back toward the old corridor, only to find it blocked. A crawler waited there, larger than any before, its body ridged and glistening with frost that steamed in the warm air. Its single black eye fixed on SpongeBob. "Back," Plankton barked. SpongeBob took a step back, but the crawler lunged. He sidestepped, grabbing a loose pipe from the wall and shoving it between two of its thrashing tendrils. The crawler hissed, recoiling enough for them to slip past. Plankton didn't even look back. "It's stalling us. Zero knows we're coming." They reached the blast door to the core chamber. The air was colder now, but charged, as if every molecule vibrated in anticipation. The pale veins in the walls glowed faster, matching SpongeBob's heartbeat. Inside, the chamber was alive. Crawlers clung to catwalks, vent dwellers perched along conduits. Even the tiny jar creatures slid across the floor, all circling the central seal. The crack in the hatch was now wide enough to reveal darkness that seemed deeper than the chamber itself. From it, a tendril emerged, massive, patterned with shifting black lines, moving not like muscle but like water given shape. Plankton pointed to a waist-high lever bolted to a crude diverter valve near the hatch. "That's it. You hold it down. No matter what happens, you don't let go until Karen says the seal is fully closed." SpongeBob planted himself by the lever. "What about you?" "I'm boosting the flow and sending a disruptor charge through the chains," Plankton said. The tendril lifted higher, curling toward SpongeBob. The hum deepened into something that felt like words. Open, closer, tome. He gritted his teeth. "Sorry, I already have a home," Plankton shouted. "Now!" SpongeBob shoved the lever down. It fought him, metal squealing, then slammed into place with a mechanical thunk. The roar of brine in the pipes was deafening. Frost exploded outward from the base of the hatch. Steam clouded the chamber as the temperature plummeted. The tendril convulsed, slamming into the floor. The smaller creatures rippled in unison, their tapping turning frantic and offbeat. Plankton climbed the chains, jamming the disruptor coil onto a rusted link. Sparks arced across the seal. "Tap the lever brace," he yelled. 3, 2, 1, in that pattern, slow it every time. SpongeBob drew his spatula and struck. Clang, 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 clang. He slowed. Clang, 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 clang. The chamber seemed to sway with the rhythm. The tendril's movements grew sluggish. Frost spread up its length, dimming the black patterns to ashen gray. Zero pushed back. The voice in SpongeBob's mind changed tone, now soft, warm, coaxing. Images flickered, the crusty crab on a sunny day, the smell of fresh patties, Gary curling up in his lap. "Don't let it be cold." His hands trembled, but he kept the rhythm. "Gary likes it cold," he muttered, striking slower still. Clang, 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 clang. Karen's voice cracked through static. "Seal temperature -40, -50. The signal's dropping." The tendril slammed into the floor beside SpongeBob, inches from the lever. Ice cracked under the impact, but he didn't let go. Plankton's disruptor sparked again, sending a sharp pulse through the chains. The smaller creatures began retreating, first in ones and twos, then in a mass exodus toward the vents and cracks in the walls. The tapping faded, replaced by the hiss of brine on hot metal. Karen's voice rose, almost triumphant. "Seal integrity at 95%, 98. Locks engaging." The crack in the hatch narrowed, the plates grinding together. The tendril whipped once, weakly, before sliding back into the darkness. The seam sealed shut, leaving only a frost-covered line. "Chains tight," Plankton said, panting. "It's asleep." SpongeBob eased the lever up. His arms burned, his breath fogging in the frigid air. We did it?" Karen's voice softened. Containment restored. They left the core chamber slowly, the hum gone, the green veins dim. By the time they reached the main dining room, the Chum Bucket was silent. The neon sign outside hummed steadily, the street beyond empty and calm. Plankton hopped onto the counter, looking almost smaller than usual. "SpongeBob, don't take this the wrong way. but I hope I never see you here again." SpongeBob smiled faintly. "Trust me, I hope so too." But as he left, his eyes drifted toward the floor, and he thought, just for a moment, he heard 3 faint taps from somewhere far below.